geosyntax, and diversion options for recyclable, reusable, and hard to dispose waste materials that was done by Tetra Tech. And so I'll go to Patty to talk about the out-of-state disposal cost benefit analysis.
Thanks, Michelle, and good evening, everybody. I'm Patty Daley. And next, please. So both studies, I should start off by saying, were commissioned to identify opportunities for the region. So I just want to say that any recommendations or suggestions coming out of these studies is really for us all to take in and then determine as individual towns in a region what might be the best paths forward for us moving ahead. So both consultants did a waste generation and composition study, and the results of the geosyntax study are here in this graphic. So in total, across the Cape and Islands, about 85,000 tons per year of municipal solid waste is generated. And that's what's coming through our transfer stations only. That's not like private hauler pickups and commercial. Organics in the far left column is the largest category. Some people might guess plastic or construction and demo, but it's organics, and that's our yard and food waste. And about 30,000 tons of organics could be separated for composting or to feed anaerobic digestion moving forward was something that the consultants here identified. And next. In particular, geosyntax was hired to look at out-of-state disposal options, and that is because, as Michelle pointed out, there is an anticipated and expected loss of landfill and waste to energy disposal options within the state moving forward. So what geosyntax did was they started with looking at all out-of-state options, including truck hauling within like a New England diameter, and they chose 150 miles as the outermost limit for what would be a reasonable and economic option for truck hauling our waste off Cape. They determined that none of the, there's nothing within 150-mile truck distance that has the long-term capacity to take our waste going forward. So they couldn't offer us like even a 10-year contract necessarily. And so came to the conclusion that their recommended long-term solution was to look at out-of-state waste hauling by rail. And again, that's a recommendation. It's something the towns would have to decide if they want to pursue going forward. One thing that's different, we did look at waste by rail in the past, about 15 years ago, I guess. And at that point, the Cape towns would have to have had contracts with a disposal facility, as well as with the CSX rail, for example, and we'd have to buy our own rail cars at that point. What's changed now is we can have a simple single contract structure. So the disposal sites out of state actually manage the rail. So they deal with the cars, with the rail lines, et cetera. So it's much more feasible, I think, at this point to think about how we might look at an out-of-state rail haul option going forward. They identified 6 out-of-state facilities, a couple in Virginia, a couple in Ohio, South Carolina, and Georgia, that were able, again, to give us that long-term contract for waste disposal and manage all the transportation issues as well. And next, please. Most of you probably know, but you might not, that we do have 2 existing rail transfer stations on the Cape, one at the Yarmouth Transfer Station and one on Joint Base Cape Cod at the Upper Cape Regional Transfer Station. Another key component that came out of the geosyntax study was looking at how to get that 30% of organics out of the waste stream so that we're not rail hauling food waste and yard waste, and look for local composting options going forward. So they looked at a couple of options. One was, what if we did backyard community composting? And another one was, what if we look at 3 kind of decentralized sub-regional composting facilities that could take waste? And they looked at, potential sites for that, not deeply, but, on a basic level, where might we be able to put these composting facilities sub-regionally. And they looked at Brewster, Dennis, Bourne, and the Joint Base Cape Cod. Next, please. So we did ask them to look at projected environmental performance. So I'm going to start with the horizontal line on this graph, and that is metric tons of CO2 equivalents per year. And that's using the EPA's WARM model. So if you start on the left, the existing system, that's what we do today. So that's truck hauling and some rail hauling to CMAS, as well as some closer by landfills within the state. And that current system actually creates more greenhouse gas than our options. In the middle, we have our out-of-state option, which fairly significantly reduces the greenhouse gas emissions. Part of that is because we're not truck hauling, and part is because these disposal sites out of state do manage their greenhouse gas emissions as well. But the biggest bang for the buck in terms of reducing greenhouse gas emissions is doing both out-of-state rail haul and organics processing. So taking the organics out, dealing with them locally, and also rail hauling to these out-of-state destinations. So I thought that was fairly interesting. And next, please. Oh yeah, sorry. I always forget this pops up. So we get 3 times the benefit of reduced greenhouse gas emissions by processing our organics and going out of state. And next. So this is projected cost savings for the next 15 years. This is a net present value analysis. So again, starting on the left, out-of-state disposal compared to what we're doing today, the region could save between $15 and $34 million over 15 years. If we move to the middle columns here, that's out-of-state disposal, and we build these 3 sub-regional decentralized composting facilities. So our savings go down a little bit because building those decentralized composting facilities is going to cost us some money. So you still save a lot, but not quite as much. And then finally, on the far right, backyard composting cost avoidance is fairly significant because you don't have to build those decentralized composting facilities. And I will say I did speak with the regional meeting of the boards of health, local boards of health, and they were okay with the backyard composting. They understand that there are ways to deal with vermin through, the proper equipment and setups. But I think it's fair to say that their favorite option were these more decentralized 3 sub-regional composting facilities. And next, please. Finally, if we did want to pursue the out-of-state rail, there are rail needs. There are about 800 rail car loads a year would need to be loaded and sent on their way. 6 rail cars each working day for 6 days a week. Interestingly, storage for up to 66 rail cars because you're backhauling empty cars, right? Either the Yarmouth transfer station or the Upper Cape Regional transfer station could meet the need. But in this case, GeoSyntec recommended developing both so that you have some redundancy. So if you had a problem at one transfer station, you could always rely on the other and vice versa. And next, please. And here, we are going to start talking about the MSW diversion study that was done by Tetra Tech, and Kari Parcell is going to present that for us.
Hi, thank you, Patty. Hi, everybody. Thank you for being here. As Chris had mentioned, I wear sort of many hats. Some people call me the solid waste and recycling expert for the Cape and Islands. Others call me the guru. Michele, next, please. Okay, so there's about 17 different divertible materials that we sort of categorized here. And when we speak about divertible, it means it's either something that can be of value, like a compost, or it could be something that's recyclable and turned into something else. So the components that we evaluated here are sort of mostly the waistband materials that Mass DEP had put into place back in 1990. And they've sort of developed since then. So when you speak of the common household recyclables, you're talking about things like glass jars and bottles and jugs and cans and, soup cans, things like that. Textiles and carpet. Textiles are clothing. When you look at white goods, we're thinking of household appliances like refrigerators or ovens, even air conditioners. Tires are whole tires, so you can't throw a whole tire into a landfill or take it to a waste to energy facility. And then universal waste is sort of a different permit value than a hazardous waste. And we all know that Calliope runs the hazardous waste here on the Cape. But universal waste are more like CFLs or mercury bearing materials or lights, things like batteries, lithium ion, auto batteries, things like that. So that's sort of a breakdown of what we looked at, as well as, what Patty had mentioned on a couple of occasions here is the organics. It seems to be sort of a low hanging fruit. And then we also look at the weight and volume of construction and demolition debris. The reason why the study didn't focus so heavily on that is because construction and demolition is already sort of being managed within the Commonwealth. Unlike organics, we're sort of at a stop loss at what we're going to do with that sort of overhaul with, the waistbands as they are now and the waistbands as they will be coming up here in November of 2022. Next slide, please. So they looked at some of the MSW, which is the municipal solid waste generation. And again, as Patty had mentioned, we're only looking at municipal programming. So what goes to the transfer station, or if you're a Bourne, Falmouth, or Provincetown, the municipalities run those curbside programs as well as the drop-off facilities. As you can see, not all 23 municipalities are represented in this, and it's just simply because we couldn't gather the information by the time that we had these deadlines to put these studies together. So you see these like sort of peak, tonnages, and that just has to represent some of our seasonality because we are a seasonal community. We're a seasonal, Cape and Islands. We have people that peak and come and go, and as we know, since 2019 through 2020 and 2021 to now, we start to see folks that are living here not only longer than they typically do, but moved in as more permanent residents here. So this is just sort of that little tonnage markage for the solid waste. Next slide, please. And then we look at recyclables. It's sort of the same thing. We got some information from some of the municipalities in the district here for the Cape and Islands. So it just shows the peak times recycling generation per month in tons. Next, please. So we have these existing local assets that exist to us. One is the town of Bourne, the ice swim. So you're looking at a landfill, a transfer station, and they do a lot of truck hauling. And they allow local haulers to come in and out, and some of that is both on Cape and off Cape. They also accept Falmouth's solid waste and recycling at that facility. So not only does that come in, but it's processed there in a way that it's transferred and then it's shipped out to the places that are, that we're using right now. The town of Yarmouth has a wastewater treatment facility. They're also looking at the anaerobic digester. They have a DOE grant that they're hoping to hear about sometime later this summer. They also have a rail haul and a secondary transfer station that's operated by CMAS Covanta, which is a commercial facility. So they're already sort of set up with the capacity to sort of handle that sort of income of solid waste and recycling. The town of Dennis has the expanded glass recycling program. They also have lots of land space, including their transfer station. So there's some options with the town of Dennis. as well as the conversations that we have, started to have with Joint Base Cape Cod, looking at their transfer station with C&D and the fact that they have rail and potential landfill capacity as far as railing that with CSX. Next slide, please. So we're looking at these, scenarios for what we want to do with Barnstable County. This also includes Dukes and Nantucket County. And, we don't really think of the Elizabeth Islands or Gosnold, which is part of Dukes County, but, they have like a small little transfer station there in Cuddy Hunk in a high velocity flood zone. So we would like to, offer our services as well. So, we want to look at collaborating with the town of Yarmouth. We don't want to, sort of cannibalize what they've already been working on for the last, 4 or 5+ years. We want everything to be cooperative. We want to work on, sharing our resources, looking at coexisting infrastructure, things that are already here, what the plans to develop are, looking at Calliope's potential fixed facility for hazardous materials. So we want to look at those, ebbs and flows with what we already have, what the resources are, and what the potential opportunities are in our future. And then that goes into the long-term plan with, maybe securing assets with Joint Base Cape Cod, having those conversations, having public-private partnerships with potential food waste, organics, and other types of facilities for sorting, potentially, building infrastructure for recyclables so that we can, glean market value, share value, look at the average market values and, the cost savings of not only our solid waste, but the recycling that we produce here on the Cape and Islands. Next slide, please. So the real opportunity came with the residential food waste. So again, 26% of it is food waste. If you add about another 14% to that, that's going to include the leaf and yard waste. Leaf and yard waste is already a waste-banned material. So technically you can't, rake your yard and go throw it into your MSW. You have to divert that in another way. And then, we have this food waste ban that's been in existence, I believe, since 2016. It's 1 ton or more per week, which is going to go down to that 1/2 ton, so 1,000 pounds. Currently I'm unsure of how many more facilities or organizations, businesses, hospitality, et cetera, that would be affected by that new 1/2 ton a week. But, as Cape Codders, as Islanders, as visitors, we really don't have a satisfactory place where we could send our commercial food waste for those generators that meet that threshold. And then C&D by weight and volume is another sort of recommendation. However, at the moment, we are managing that material stream and we're doing it within the Commonwealth. It's expensive, but it's being managed at the moment. Next slide. So when we look at food waste, again, we're targeting food waste. So you'll hear, Patty earlier and me now, food waste, food. It's a low-hanging fruit outside of the fact that, finding a site assessment, finding somebody willing to provide land space. And, there's a fear around food waste and commercial food waste because of the vector, because of the smell, because of, needing somebody to help manage that. So right now we have 9 active municipalities within the Cape, and then the islands are managing it on their own at the moment. But Bourne is about ready to work with one of our vendors that's listed here, Black Earth Compost. They're expected to begin their drop-off separation program in August. So at the moment we have 9 of the 15, we will have 10. So this is just a very simplistic, I'm a resident, I have a transfer station sticker, I can bring it to my municipality, their drop off, if I have the sticker and if they offer it. So we would like to change that dynamic to residential and commercial feasibility within these 3 site assigned places that Patty had mentioned earlier in the presentation. Next slide. So again, I hope I'm not overstepping Patty because I don't know what slide number this is, and I know we were going to switch off so that you don't have to listen to one of us this entire time. But potential opportunities at Joint Base Cape Cod. So again, it's looking at the rail haul that's already there at the Upper Cape Regional Transfer Station that mainly sends out construction demolition. For me, and I think for all of us looking at, the hurricane, or not the hurricanes, I'm sorry, the tornadoes in 2019, emergency storm management, we all sort of sit on our own little island, if you will. Each town has their own plan, and their plans, sit with their own town. And we really need to look at resource sharing when it comes to things like organics, solid waste, recycling, and, storm debris management. Organics, composting, the digester potentially that we're looking at in the town of Yarmouth, and then septic and sludge management. I don't know if all of you have heard, but Maine has passed law that says that we're not able to, and this has been in law for forever, but we all, there's little earmarks and little loopholes that we've been using. So we're officially sort of cut off here. Next slide. So again, same thing with Yarmouth, because it sits on, Yarmouth has an energy park. They're looking at siting an energy park with a potential anaerobic digester. It already has the rail haul. They're looking at the Department of Energy grant for the 1.5 million. They're still doing some studies around that. They can help participate in some of the yard waste composting if they get that digester in place. And then again, with Calliope's efforts with the permanent hazardous waste collection facility. Next slide. So again, going into other, what we're doing currently. So these are things that I've been working on since I've been here. I'm in my 6th year. So, Yarmouth with the anaerobic digester, the DOE grant, the Department of Energy, Dennis opened up their glass recycling program back in 2019. So that's still going steady and strong. We have a boat shrink wrap recycling program that continues annually. Our latex paint collection programs in its 5th year. We have mattress recycling all over the Cape and Islands. Eastham hosts a facility so that smaller towns are able to get to a place where the vendors are easily able to pick that up and take it out. We have a strand light holiday, light collection that we've been working on. AmeriCorps has been so amazing at volunteering with some of these programs. And then again, that permanent facility that Calliope is working on. So these are things that are already in existence. We've kept them going annually. And we're hoping that we can look at this commercial composting site and these 3 sub-regional facilities, maybe one upper, mid, and lower Cape, so that there's access for commercial composting as well as residential composting. Next slide. So I definitely went over Patty's slides. I'm sure she's not disappointed.
Finish her up, Kari, you did good.
Although I'm sure you're tired of my voice, but what we're doing right now is, we're looking at the next steps. We didn't want to close out this feasibility study with any information that we weren't going to take forward. So again, the food waste organics, we're going to talk about it. The digester that Yarmouth has been looking at, the sub-regional composting options and opportunities, resource sharing, the storm debris management, looking at construction demolition down the road once we can kind of secure what we're doing with organics. Speaking with the towns, we've already had some meetings with some of our stakeholders looking at what we want to do, where we want to go. Patty is graciously taking this on with the Board of Health, as well as speaking with the powers that be at Joint Base Cape Cod, engaging sort of their assessment around, what we're looking for in our near future, as well as the long-term planning goes. And then really the public outreach and education. So if we build it, they will come. So we want to make sure that they're doing everything appropriately, correctly. So once these facilities are sort of sited and available, we want to make sure that the public, both, long-term and seasonality, the folks that are here and visit us understand that this is what, this is how we do it, and this is how we want you to do it as well. So that's going to rely on the outreach and education as far as infrastructure goes for recycling and solid waste and organics go. Next slide. And I finished it up for Patty. So I kept chatting. So this leaves it for questions, and I'm going to let Patty answer the questions since I just did all the presentation.
Oh, no, you don't get off that quickly.
Thanks so much for that, Kari and Patty, as well as Michele. A lot of information there. And so I will open it up for questions. And sorry, Kari, if people direct questions to you, unless you're going to disappear, you're gonna answer them. I know you will. So
it's okay. I'm here. Thank you.
I see David Dow has his hand raised. And if you want to raise your hand, for a future question, please do. Go ahead, David.
Can you hear me? I have a question that stemmed from a meeting that the Massachusetts Army National Guard held, where they got briefed on a plan by the town of Barnstable to take over the wastewater treatment plant at Joint Base Cape Cod and expand it to serve the upper Cape towns, the town of Barnstable and Joint Base Cape Cod itself. And so this would be a fairly large facility. And my concern is what they were going to do with the municipal solid waste, which I notice is, or the sewage sludge, which I notice is not included amongst the municipal solid waste. But back in the 1960s, when I worked at the city of Philadelphia's Northeast Sewage Treatment Plant, they actually had an anaerobic digester for sewage sludge. So that I was thinking that it might be something that if this new plant goes forward for the Cape Cod, operated by the town of Barnstable, that we might, and then if they include an anaerobic digester, that we might use that for some of the other organic waste plus the sewage sludge. So I was wondering if any thought had been given to that option.
So I just want to make sure that I'm understanding the question about the difference between typical organics through a digester as well as the sludge.
Yes.
Yeah, so so part of the DOE grant and what the DEP and other grant funds have, helped fund through the Yarmouth program is looking at the two sort of feedstocks, if you will. So one, is there enough feedstock to actually operate a digester and of what size? But also, do we separate food and organics from the sludge because they offer different sort of residual results, if you will, as far as like what comes out of that digester. So that's part of why Yarmouth continues to look at what type of facility they need, what's the size, where's the feedstock, and will they separate food and organics from the actual treatment sludge at the wastewater facilities? And where would that feedstock come from, whether it's food waste and organics, and whether or not it's sludge and sewage waste from, say, the town of Barnstable, Bourne, and other entities either on or off Cape.
I should mention that Yarmouth is aware that if they do mix biosolids in with the food waste digestion, that they're going to need to take out, they're going to need to deal with PFAS, which comes from the biosolids.
Thank you, Patty.
Yeah, that's been an issue for Sierra Club for quite a while with that facility, is to ensure that they do not blend the two streams, because food waste is nice and clean, yard waste is nice and clean, and let's keep them that way. That's why our sludge is no longer going up to Maine due to what's happened up there. Did that answer your question, David?
Yes. But I was just going to, the only comment I would make is that a lot of the towns in Cape Cod have decided as part of the comprehensive wastewater management plan to do sewering and build wastewater treatment plants of their own, or combine them with more across different towns. So we're going to have an increased volume of sludge that we're going to have to deal with. And my concern is what the possible solutions are.
So just quickly, these two solid waste studies did not look at septage and sludge. I understand what you're saying, and I hear you, and I know that people have been thinking about that. Yeah.
Anybody else have questions? Yeah, go ahead, Scott, please.
Thank you. For Patty, a couple of things more procedural. Can we get a copy of the presentation? And could we also get the supporting data on some of the slides and how they were built out to create the assertions of going to, landfills in Virginia and South Carolina actually make more sense on a financial side? If we're all looking at life saying that we potentially are going to all target organics, and we're going to see a potential, you'll never get it all, but instead of the 35%, I think 36% organic, let's say if you pulled out 30%, the state of Massachusetts would actually flip from an exporting state to an importing state for the energy from waste facilities. So I was just trying to better understand that, Patty, that if the goal is to get the organic fraction out as much as we should, and that is clearly the lowest hanging fruit, as I think somebody mentioned earlier, why would we kind of discount that opportunity? And I'm not wearing a hat that I wore for 30 years, just as a town of Falmouth resident. It just seemed a little bit odd to me that we still wouldn't run those numbers of keeping the material in-state with an in-state solution. Thank you. And oh, by the way, great job. I'm sorry, I should have started off with that.
So I would direct you to the two studies. Chris, I don't know if you shared a link to those, but we can reshare it.
Can you pop that in the chat, maybe Michelle? Thanks.
If all of the analysis on the out-of-state option is in the Geosyntec study.
Okay.
Both Tetra Tech and Geosyntec looked at organics and strongly recommended that we pull as much out as we can and deal with it locally.
Right. Very good. Thank you, Patty.
Yep, you're welcome.
Any other questions from anybody at the town level?
I would also sort of like to add to that, Scott, and it sounds like you've been doing this for many, many years. With the moratorium on the waste to energy facilities here and the capacity for landfill diminishing here in the Commonwealth, I don't think pulling organics would introduce an incentive for out of state, sort of importing of solid waste when we're trying to eliminate waste by 30% as well as, 90% by 2050. So I think it would just leave more opportunity to sort of, backlog what we already have and then slow down our rate of generation for municipal solid waste and commercial waste, if that makes any sense at all.
It would be a difficult call for a lot of these companies that are involved, that are publicly traded or not, to ever reduce the amount of volume that they process, just from a financial perspective. I understand where you're going, Kari, and it's an interesting discussion. Yep. Thank you.
Thank you.
I will mention as well, there's been a lot of merger and acquisition activity going on in the waste field very recently, in the last year or so. Nauset disposal was sold to, I think, Waste Connections. There's a new Win Waste Innovations, but there's a lot of consolidation that is happening right now. So it's going to be interesting to see where that all ends up.
Any other questions from anybody else? Gordon, go ahead.
I had a question. My name's Gordon. Oh, wait a second. You can hear me. I'm from Barnstable, and about 2/3 of our waste is picked up by private haulers. So, and I know most of them offer recycling. It's all single stream. Does that get processed within the state in MRFs, or does it just end up in a landfill? Where does it all go?
As far as recycling, if people are recycling correctly, we always say like recycle right. If things are being correctly placed in a single stream bin at the curb versus, going to a transfer station where there's like a source separation happening, if it's done correctly and it's being sent to an in-state MRF within our Commonwealth, it's being bailed and sent out. There's some interesting studies that somebody had actually brought up from the town of Brewster the other day, because there was a lot of social media happening with some negative comments. And Brooke Nash and John Fisher at DEP took the liberty to share some statistics. And it's over 80% of recyclables that wind up in a Commonwealth MRF that are properly bailed and properly sent to market versus less than 20% residual, meaning it's the trash that just falls off the conveyor belts or is just not recyclable, that human hands or the conveyor belts are reading when it's being processed through these facilities.
Okay, thank you.
So you're saying about 80% of what goes into the recycling bin single stream is actually recycled. Is that?
That is correct. If it's being correctly placed in those bins and it's being sent to the MRF and it's, it's a quality material stream, then over 80% is going to wind up sold to market, and less than 20% will be residual or trash that winds up on the sorting floors. And that's what they're seeing throughout the Commonwealth as far as the statistics go for the audits.
Great, thanks for that. Morgan, you had a question.
It was more of just a thought. I was going to type it in the chat. I had to pop out for a second, so I didn't know if this was covered at all during the presentation, but I was just curious if there was any data on the potential discrepancy between composting and greenhouse gas emissions, and if that if town-sponsored composting programs actually can help us hit our lower greenhouse gas emission targets as opposed to it all going into the landfill. Is there any data on that?
Yep, we did cover that in one of the slides. So
okay, it's probably when I stepped out. Thanks.
Sorry. So, compared to what we're doing today, which is truck and rail hauling to kind of nearby disposal, going out of state by rail realizes greenhouse gas benefits.
Mm-hmm.
And if we compost, if we divert the organics out and go out of state, there's a 3 times benefit of reduced greenhouse gas emission.
That's what I was looking for. Thank you so much.
So interestingly enough, Morgan, the study did find that it's sort of twofold. So what we're doing right now is sort of like maximizing the worst case scenario for us. The second is if we don't remove organics, but we continue to rail haul, or if we choose to rail haul out of state to one of the facilities that were identified, it lowers it. But then if you remove at least 30% over the 36%, it actually, what Patty said, is it twofold. So there's kind of this 2-tier benefit to the out of state, but then the removal of the organics exemplifies that.
Really interesting. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
So I had a question, Kari. You mentioned the updated waistbands. Can you talk about what's going to happen this fall with the existing waistbands and new enforcement, perhaps?
Yeah, sure. So again, there are material streams that exist within the waistband. So this dates back to the 1990s. I believe the first waistband was in 1990, and it started with mercury bearing items. And then there's things like white goods, like your kitchen appliances, whole tires, your basic recyclables, cardboard, glass bottles. Other materials are like leaf and yard waste. Again, you're not supposed to just rake up your yard and throw it into your trash barrel. So there's this list of waistband items. And then with the 2020-2030 solid waste master plan, they introduced 2 new material streams, which are textiles, which are things like clothing, linens, a shoe, just a single shoe is a textile. And we don't really think about that. Our towels, our clothing, the things that we're wearing, our textiles, carpets, things like if you were to rip up the upholstery from a furniture to reupholster it. And then mattresses. So mattresses and box springs, that is not inclusive of things like futons, crib mattresses, things like that. And then the other piece is that they're lowering the threshold from the commercial food waste ban from 1 ton a week, which is 2,000 pounds generated and tossed, down to a 1/2 ton, which is 1,000 pounds. So these are sort of 2 brand new waste bans with the extension of a threshold decrease for the food waste. And that's going to begin in November of 2022. DEP does have an enforcement department. So they're going to look at potential processors, generators, folks that manage these material streams, and then work with them to make sure that there's language built in within the municipalities, within the Board of Health, that states what the expectations are, not only from the residents, but those who are managing the material streams, whether it's the municipality, a hauler, or a vendor, meaning that somebody is collecting these and then are responsible for the actual processing of the materials or diversion of.
Gordon, go ahead, please.
I had a follow-up for Kari. So the DEP has a department that enforcement department, but you're saying that the town Board of Health needs to boost up regulations to make sure it happens?
Yeah, so I mean, it's not so arduous as like they have to set these regulations, but if they're managing some of these material streams, then there needs to be some sort of language within the town, whether it's the Board of Health or some sort of, bylaw that says, DEP, we're recognizing this, we take in this material stream. And so here's the language that mirrors DEP's, waste ban. And so there's actually an informational webinar tomorrow on how to be in compliance with the new waste bans. And it's just a simple piece of language that needs to exist so that folks and employees and those who are managing these streams, again, whether it's the town or a hauler or a vendor, understands what the expectations are moving forward from November 1st, 2022, going forward so that they're in compliance with the new waste bans. But they're familiar with this since 1990 with the other waste ban, so.
David, go ahead.
Wanted to find out about two types of recyclables, plastics, which we're overwhelmed with by shopping in stores or shopping online, and also newspapers, which accumulate and don't seem to have a good way to actually be recycled. And for example, in my case, I get the Boston Globe on Sunday in print, and then the rest of the week I get it online and just read the articles I'm interested in. So I was wondering if there's any kind of outreach to these kinds of businesses to decrease both the plastics and the papers components of the recycling pot.
No, that's a great question. So there's a Department of Mass DEP that's called Recycle Works MA, and they target their information towards businesses so that businesses can look at material streams, vendors, outreach and education so that they're able to be in compliance with any sort of waste ban or recycling ordinances that exist. My department specifically, where I come from, is municipal, which we consider residential. So I don't necessarily target businesses or multi-unit facilities or things like that. I can be a liaison to help direct businesses and large scale facilities, to the correct places. But for the most part, Recycle Works and the Center for Eco-Technology assists businesses to make sure that they're in compliance, or if they want to go above and beyond compliance, they're able to through their technical assistance programs. And that's Recycling Works MA. And CET, the Center for Eco-Technology.
Any other questions, anybody? Okay, well, thank you so much for coming tonight, Michele and Patty and Kari. A lot of information conveyed and some good questions and discussion. Really appreciate your time. I guess I would say if you were to step back and obviously it's activists and the public and citizens who really have to affect change here. There's only so much the county and the towns can do. What would you suggest Sierra Club push on at a policy level?
Michele, you want to take that?
I think I would go with legislation that's currently being worked through the state. So there are a number of bills. There's one that I've heard of particularly about extended producer responsibility for certain
Sure.
waste streams that has gone through or continues to go through or will go through the legislature at some point. And I'm certain that Sierra Club is very good at following legislative work of the state, and whatever not only the organization but its members can do to support those things where you feel that it's needed is a place that I would start.
Mm-hmm. Okay, yeah, we have a Massachusetts chapter that has a legislative liaison and definitely pushing hard for the bottle bill, right now, as well as a number of things. hoping an energy bill, climate bill comes out any second now, really desperately hoping that happens before the end of this week, because otherwise it's going to be subject to a governor's veto. So we're definitely active on the state level on those policy things. I wonder if there was anything at the county level that comes to mind. Go ahead, please, Patty.
I would say, if you want something to do today, you could support and help get the word out about the boat shrink wrap and the string light and the latex paint and the other current programs that are in place. And then once we get our feet on the ground with composting, certainly public outreach and education is, to me, one of the biggest things that could be helpful.
Sure. Okay, great.
Thank you, Patty, for mentioning that.
Yeah, there's a lot of great programs that go on. I've got a string of lights that was pulled out of the bushes and I have to store it for a while, but it's coming your way eventually. So yeah, everybody, thank you for coming tonight, and enjoy the rest of this evening. Take care.
Thank you for having us, and thank you all
Thank
for
you.
being here with us.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
everyone.
Bye, good
Have a good
night.
evening.
Good night.
Bye-bye.